Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to discuss some of my recent reads. It is the last day of May, and I realize there's a bunch of books that I've read in the month of May that I haven't yet talked about, and I definitely wanted to talk about them on the channel. So the first book I want to mention, and I read this a couple of weeks ago now, I listened to it on audiobook, and that's Magic Shifts by Ilona Andrews. And this is a urban fantasy book. It is book 8 in the Kate Daniels series. So I can't really talk about it for fear of plot spoilers. So all I would say is, in general, if you like urban fantasy, this is a great series with great character development. Kate Daniels, the main character, is sort of this magician, peace law enforcement type officer kind of thing in Atlanta, Georgia, that has been destroyed by magic. Basically, magic has swept over the community in waves and destroyed all the infrastructure from our modern day world, and the magic comes and goes. And so people that can straddle both the technology from the modern day world and the use magic when the magic is up, as the book talks about it, are the most successful people in this world. And Kate Daniels sort of acts as a sort of a guardian of the peace kind of person, and at the beginning of the series, and of course through 8 books in the series, she's kind of advanced not only in her magic powers but in her role in this city, in the city of Atlanta. And I think it's a wonderful story. It explores Kate Daniels, not only her development in her career, but her relationship. She finds love in this series. She finds other found family members throughout the course of the series, and it's really fun. So if you like urban fantasy, I would definitely recommend checking out the Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews. Then I read Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This was another Regency romance, or another historical romance read with Doris and Kate, my romance reading buddies. And this was a really interesting and different romance. So this romance takes place, I'm not going to remember the characters' names because it's been several weeks ago now. But basically, the young woman in the story is one of the first women to attend Oxford, and she gets a scholarship. She's very poor, and she gets a scholarship from basically a suffragette society that they will fund her tuition, and if she gives so much of her time, volunteers in the suffragette movement. So as part of her volunteer work that she has to do, she is asked to approach certain members, high-ranking in the government, and basically try to sell them on passing a bill that would give women the right to own property and not lose their wealth when they get married, or if they don't get married, not have any wealth. And so our heroine approaches a duke who is a member of parliament and who is known to be very influential in the government, and sparks fly, and the rest of the story takes off from there, as you can imagine. The thing that I found really interesting and quite different about this book is that it doesn't shy away from the fact that these two characters are very different economic and social classes, and it just simply isn't done for members of the aristocracy to have relationships with commoners. She is a commoner, he is a duke. They have feelings for each other, but there seems to be no path forward for them in terms of a real relationship, an honest, out in the open relationship. And how they deal with that felt very realistic, and it wasn't just brushed under the rug as a lot of times these things are in romance novels. So I really like the tone of this book. The cover makes it look like it's like just a frivolous, fun, humorous romp, and it really isn't. It takes on quite serious topics, and while there are funny bits, it really is more serious than the cover would lead you to believe, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I finished was Regeneration by Pat Barker. I've talked about this several times in videos earlier on in the month. I buddy read this with Sean the Book Maniac. This is the first book in Pat Barker's trilogy about World War I. So basically, this book takes place in a hospital in England where soldiers are sent to recover from mental health issues that they're having. What we would call PTSD in a lot of cases now, but at the time was considered shell shock, or soldiers trying to get out of being at war. And our main character is based on a real person, Siegfried Sassoon, he's passed away obviously, but he was a poet in real life. And the doctor here, Dr. Rivers, is also a real person in history. And so from the various perspectives of Dr. Rivers and Siegfried Sassoon and other soldiers who are at this hospital, we learn about the horrors of war, the things that these men have to face by trying to have a stiff upper lip and not show the impacts and effects of the horrors that they have experienced while in trench warfare and during World War I, where so much of the fighting was up close and personal, not like today. Lot in here about sexuality, and what is and is not acceptable in terms of sexuality at this time period during World War I. A lot of things to think about in terms of war and what war does to people, the impact it has not only on the folks fighting the war, but the folks back home who are so separate from it because they're not like in the physical experience of it, and how that distances people left behind from those that go off to war, whether or not it's ever morally acceptable to fight a war and to ask young men and young women to risk their lives in such a way. Gave me a lot of food for thought. The writing is really excellent. At times, if this book did feel like I was a little bit not smart enough to understand everything the author was getting at, but by doing this as a buddy read with Sean, as buddy reads always do, you bounce ideas off one another, and it really overall enhances your experience of the book and makes you delve into the text in a much deeper way than you might otherwise do. And I really got a lot out of this book, and I thought it was very well done. The next book was not so successful, and this is not going to be a popular opinion, but I buddy read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee with Britta Bowler. And I'll let Britta tell you her response to this book, but I was very frustrated by this book and ended up not liking it very much at all by the end. This is historical fiction. It's a family drama. Basically, we follow 3 or 4 generations of a Korean family. The story starts out in Korea with a husband and wife team who run a boarding house. Their daughter ends up pregnant and won't say who the father is, and gets married to a priest who's traveling to Japan. And so the rest of the story is following the daughter, Sunja, and her new husband as they try to make a life in Japan. And this all takes place, the story starts in the early 1900s and goes up through past World War II, and into even almost the current day, I think, by the time we're done with this. So Sunja is our main person that we're following, but we do get these other generations, her parents before, and then her children and her children's children after that. This book started out quite promising for me. The story is well told, it's entertaining. I don't think there's anything particularly literary about it, but I think it's a good story. And then by halfway into this, I just think Min Jin Lee loses control of her own narrative and tries to put too much into one book. We got storylines from side characters that you get one chapter where you delve very deeply into their story, and then we never hear from them again, leaving you to wonder why the heck they were ever in the story to begin with. You get hit on the head over and over and over and over again by themes that Min Jin Lee is trying to, deal with in her book. One of the themes is, female beauty and what that, culture imposes on women in terms of beauty standards. But I didn't need to hear on every page how one particular character had, because she lived a life of poverty and hard work and had to be outdoors all the time, her skin was wrinkled and old and brown and, you know, all these, it was basically the same description like every other chapter. Like, I get it already. I think Min Jin Lee needs to trust that her readers understand the point that she's trying to make. And I just felt like I was being hit over the head with her point too many times. The other thing that really bugged me about this was 3/4 of the way into the book. Something happens to one of the characters that made me want to hurl the book across the room and just quit at that point. And maybe if I hadn't been buddy reading this with Britta, I would have just said, yeah, I'm done with this book, because it was so ridiculous what happened. It just felt like a soap opera to me. It was one of those things where, oh, it's time for something dramatic to happen, so let's just do this, I didn't feel that it really matched what we had known about the character up until that point. I just felt it read just like a soap opera, like drama for drama's sake, and just crazy, ridiculous things. There were other things where characters were, you know, omnipresent and able to do all these amazing things previously, and then you get to a certain point of the book and they just can't do one simple task. They can't do it anymore. And it's like, you could do all these other amazing things beforehand, but now you can't do this one thing. Like, that didn't track with what had happened before. So really a disappointment for me, because I think the ideas of you know, the kind of prejudice that Koreans faced then and probably still face today in Japan, the second-class citizen nature of Koreans living in Japan, and then what happened to Koreans who had been brought to Japan during Japanese occupation of Korea before World War II, and then after World War II, when the two Koreas, the South and North Korea, kind of went separate paths, and then the Koreans kind of lost their ability to go back, right? They're stuck in Japan, basically, because we can't go to North Korea because it's closed off, and South Korea doesn't really want you back anymore, and maybe you were from the northern part of the country beforehand. I mean, that whole aspect of it was super interesting, and I wish... I know that was touched on here, but I just felt the dramatic aspects of the story took away from what we were learning about the historical points of Koreans living in Japan. So yeah, probably not a popular opinion. I know this is a much beloved book, but that's just how I experienced that book. I then read a mystery novel, the first in a series on Britta's recommendation, and that was Death at La Fenice. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, by Donna Leone. And this is book 1 in the Commissario, is it Brunetti? I think, mystery series, which has like 20 or more installments at this point. It started, I think this book was first published in the early 1990s. So it's been around a while, but this is a great mystery series. And our detective is, he's a detective in Venice, Italy, and he gets brought in to solve the crime of a famous conductor who is poisoned during, he's conducting an opera, and I know nothing about music. He's conducting this opera, and in between the acts, he goes to his dressing room and he is poisoned, and the commissioner gets brought in to solve the crime. And so you're brought along with him as he investigates this murder, and there's his boss, who is ridiculous, and he has to deal with his ridiculous demands, which is great, very funny, and the police detective's wife and children, the great story behind his family life, and interesting detail about Venice and what it's like to actually live in Venice as a working person, and then all this detail about the opera and this conductor and his backstory, and just great. Really loved it. Very much reminds me of the Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. So if that's the kind of mystery that you like, you might want to give this mystery series a try by Donna Leone. And then the last book I want to talk about in this recent reads is this giant. I finally conquered The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. Book 3 in the Thomas Cromwell series. I have been reading this since April, so it took me quite a while, and what really turned the tide for me was Sean's suggestion to somebody. I watched a video where he discussed that he really loves listening to Hilary Mantel books on audiobook. So I had already read like maybe a little bit less than half of this in the physical copy and was really struggling to maintain my interest in it. Picked up the audiobook, and that really did help. The narrator, the gentleman, I think his name is Ben Williams, is so fabulous as a narrator. He does the voices really well and the accents really well. There's tons of characters in this because this is, Thomas Cromwell, court of King Henry VIII. After this book takes place right after Anne Boleyn has been beheaded, and we follow the events of the political intrigue in King Henry's court as Thomas Cromwell reaches the peak of his power, and then things happen after that are not so great. I mean, it's all historical, so I can't really spoil it. But what I found was the first half of this book was very slow. Not much happens. There's an awful lot of standing around talking. Cromwell is flashing back to past days that we've already visited in previous books, so that felt like a lot of repetitive information. And then as you get to the middle of the book and then the last half of the book, events start to speed up, and it's quite engaging and almost even, dare I say, thrilling at the end. So very oddly paced for me. The first half really slow. The second half, kind of gallops away. The thing that I will say is very well done in this book, I think, is the tension. This book feels so claustrophobic and so tense, and you can just feel like you're just constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You can tell Cromwell's kind of, he's gained so much power and so much, he's risen so fast and so far in power and in the politics of the country as a commoner. And you just know this is not going to work out well, that the other members of the aristocracy are not going to sit back and idly let this commoner sort of usurp what they consider their natural places at the head of state. And Henry, the king, is, in the latter half of his years, and not aging well, not physically and not mentally either. And so you're really seeing the wheels start to come off here, with all of that. And so that's really well done. I just feel like the first half of the book could have been edited better to get us to the interesting bit at the end, later on. So yeah. So uneven, I guess, is what I think about this, but the second half of the book was fantastic. And the writing is good throughout. I mean, Hilary Mantel is such a fabulous writer. So it's definitely not a craftsmanship issue. I think it's just, she maybe didn't need to feel that she had to include every single detail of everything that she ever learned about Thomas Cromwell in here. So yeah, that's some of the books that I've recently finished. May has been a great reading month. I hope that you are all doing well and that you have found some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.